call it die-off is because I see a really horrible future coming. It's not one that I want.
It was good while it lasted, but this good thing has come to an end. It was good while it lasted. This is the end. This is the end. This is the end. This is the end. Home stretch for the human race. Got the end in sight. Gotta pick up the pace to the finishing line at the edge of the old divide cliff.
We asked people. Okay. Sound check. Pauline? I know I can't be heard. I'm working on it. Input. Input. Are we good now? We good now? Okay. I'm going to pretend like it's all good now. Let's start over with my apologies for being a technological Luddite. And I'll start by thanking the 15 new members of the Nature Bat's Last YouTube channel. They are in chronological order going back nearly 3 weeks to when we last had one of these live stream events. Thomas Bartlett, Reg Richard, Thomas Reese, Greg Milner, ABC, Ted Cates, Steve McDonald, Terry Rankin, Jasper Podenko, Derek Cassidy, Mr. Pater, James Brefield, B. Rector, Charles Pierce, and Barbara Bainey. Thanks to each of you for joining the Nature Bat's Last YouTube channel. And thanks to Dwayne Dietz, who just made a generous contribution to start us off. All right. Sorry about that. Then we asked you, anybody who wanted to get involved, to write an obituary and an epitaph for yourself. as if you had died and you were one of your relatives or somebody close to you writing both an obituary and an epitaph. This is an exercise I had my students do for many years in the classroom. It was uniformly hated, of course, like with almost everything else I asked my students to do. And as I pointed out to them many times throughout an entire semester, this is life. You're adults. You get to do what you want. Everything's optional. Some people wrote to me over the course of the last couple of days and said this is very difficult and I just can't do it and I don't know why and so on. And that's fine. I'm not going to pass judgment on anybody. You know, back in the days when I was at the front of the classroom, I would actually pass judgment on people. I would give them poor grades or no grades at all for not completing an exercise. But that's not the case here. So I appreciate each of you who has taken part in any way in these exercises because they're not difficult. So they're not easy at all. They are very difficult. You have to have the ability and the willingness to think about what is important to you, what has been important to you, how you are going to live your life, how you have lived your life through the lens of somebody else. And that's not easy to take on because we don't know what those people are up to. And there's always somebody looking over our shoulders. And in the public education system, introspection is basically banned. It is strongly discouraged because, think about it, if people were to ponder their place in the universe and determine their relatively minor, that they are a relatively minor player in a cosmic play, then maybe they wouldn't take so seriously their work ethic that does a lot for the 1% and not much for the rest of us. If people actually thought about their place in the universe, they might live differently. And living differently is not what the people pulling the strings of empire in any civilization want us to do. So this is very difficult. And I'm the first to admit that it's difficult. Back in the day, I used to write one of these every semester to set an example for my students. I haven't done that for a few years. I'm going to read a couple of them that were submitted to start the conversation. And anybody feel free to weigh in with either your epitaph, the few words that might appear on your tombstone, for example, or your obituary. I'm going to start with one submitted by Terry, and I didn't get permission from Terry to read this, so I won't even tell you whether Terry is male or female. So Terry writes, a Peircean semiotician, philosopher, and pragmatist theologian, in parentheses, B.A., M.A., D. Min, which means Doctor of Ministry, dissident Christian in praxis and Christian anarchist on principle, Terry was an ardent rebel and revolutionary prophetic voice of spiritual activism and existential rebellion, opposing attractional, propositional, colonial, churchianity, and mass extinction by extermination. As a stranger in this strangest of worlds, he opposed worldly government on anarchist principle for their global, elitist, absolutist abnegation of the very idea of a just and equitable social contract. He is survived by a massively vast majority who couldn't have cared less, a minuscule few who gave him more than a passing shit for him and his life, and, fewest of all, those most precious to him who truly loved him in spite of his youthful excesses and the morbid rage of grief that finally afflicted and terminated him with extreme prejudice to his last breath, thought, and care. His final request is that he be remembered annually on March 29th, the U.S. AmeriCorps National Day of Smoke and Mirrors. If you listen closely enough on that day, you may just hear the echo of his voice in the void of his silence, speaking truth to the powers, telling us all and only their permanent lies. If you happen to hear that echo, make and take time to pay an act of love forward in his memory. And then on his tombstone, he actually made a tombstone, which demonstrates considerably more talent with respect to technology than I have. Terry, 2 more names, June 1949 to not filled in yet, thankfully. Cause of death, his rage of grief. Au revoir. Over. Whew. English words. And he or she crosses out for futilities, bluff, for futilities, dust, this work, dust, and ash. And then, so he writes that and crosses it out on the tombstone, and then writes, done and gone is enough. God help her sorry ass. We coulda and shoulda, but wouldn't and didn't. So that's nice. It's nice to have some contributions here so that I can at least have something to talk about. The next one comes from Daniel Reich, and I actually received permission from Daniel to read his, so I will. In Memoriam, Daniel Reich, 1958 to 2020, ? Daniel begins with, I found this to be a difficult task, so instead of diving into the obituary, we're going to spend a few seconds talking about the difficulty of this task. And of course it is. As he points out, after all, how could I know what may be said about me after I'm gone? It would require knowledge of how the people closest and dearest to my heart actually see me. And that isn't any of my business. Nevertheless, it's always the difficult things that are worth doing. Let this be a way to express the love I have for the dear ones in my life and the boundless gratitude for all I have received. A eulogy of a sort that expresses some of the things I'd like to be remembered for. And then the obituary begins, or the eulogy. We're here today to say goodbye to Daniel Reich, but let's not be sad. Dan wouldn't want it that way. He would much prefer it if we all had a wonderful time, a party to celebrate the fortune he had accumulated near the end of his life. No, he didn't die a wealthy man by the ordinary sense. Dan never cared much about money. In fact, he hated it because of the inestimable damage the love of money has wreaked upon everything worthwhile. We are his fortune. He loved us, both by his words and actions. He valued us more than any material good and also any material pleasures. He'd be the first to tell you that he'd wasted most of his life pursuing those material pleasures with abandon and without sanity, until he found himself beyond the reach of anything good or wholesome. He became empty. Finding life had lost all meaning. Taking his own life seemed a reasonable option. But we all know what happened. After all, it was we who had helped him. We gave him the means to build his very own special ladder with which he climbed out of the hole he had dug. We gave him the means to mend his sorrow. We took care of him until he could not only take care of himself, but to be of service to others. The circle is complete. Nothing to be sad about here. In his own words, quote, I'm the luckiest son of a bitch that ever walked on hands and knees. And then the tombstone, Daniel Reich, 1958 to 2002, 20-something, with a question mark. Husband, father, son, friend, lover of life, in the nick of time. So that's beautiful. Thank you both to Terry and Daniel for making those contributions. I see that Raza Eco Warrior has contributed an epitaph. I can't believe it's over. And Pat the Batman fan contributes George Carlin's epitaph. He was here just a minute ago. Certainly feels like it in the case of George Carlin. Okay. Somebody let me know if I missed something in the comments that I should be paying attention to. Ted Cates makes a beautiful observation. Life gave me no definitive answers, just gave me results. Isn't that the truth? And Pat the Batman fan contributes, I think mine would be, quote, well, it's about time, end quote. So these are wonderful contributions, and I hope that at the very least each of you thought for however long about what you want others to have said about you when you're gone, assuming it's more than a few seconds between when you're gone and when everybody you know is gone. I think that's a reasonably safe assumption to make. And you're welcome, Daniel. Come on, anybody. Hit me with your best shot, so to speak. You'll notice the other guys with me today, looking over my shoulder. Should it be the two guys live stream? Ask an ecologist and a renowned criminal anything? Raza contributes an epitaph. I'm here all week, folks. Or maybe not. And from Brooklyn Culture Jam, it was the thought that counted. Does that come from somebody? Brooklyn Culture Jam? It was the thought that counted? Seems I've heard that before. I mean, I know I've heard that before. I don't know if there's a credited source. All right. If nobody writes anything, I have nothing to say. Oh yes, I have been labeled an eco-terrorist by the Obama administration. That comes close to being a criminal, yes, but just because I was called something doesn't mean I was that thing. I'm not saying that Guy Fawkes was wrong to conduct his criminal activities. Criminality is defined by the people who make the rules, after all. Interesting you ask, Pat the Batman fan, what are your thoughts on burial versus cremation? Personally, I find burial medieval. Hold that thought. Somewhere here is my last will and testament, and it describes what I want done with my body when I'm done. So, Jimmy John, I don't know the names of some of the scientists that have peer-reviewed your journals. Peer-reviewed journals are blind reviewed in every case I know about. So the editor is known. The person who writes a potentially peer-reviewed article sends the article to the editor. The editor sends it to peer reviewers, typically 3 or more. Those peer reviewers are unknown to the author or authors of the paper. And the comments come back and it's blind. Occasionally, and more in the social sciences than in the, quote, natural sciences, the approach has become double blind. So the identifying information from the author or authors is removed before the paper is sent to the reviewers. Thank you, Dwayne Dietz, for another generous contribution, along with a lovely epitaph. He spoke up when the timing was right, that humanity might survive. Indeed. Okay, back to my will. Let's see. I'm not going to tell you who gets my $14.27. Here it is, Clause 9. I direct that my body be cut into pieces and cast to the winds in a location deemed reasonably wild by anybody who finds my body. If carving up my body and casting it to the winds proves illegal or otherwise logistically infeasible, please stick it in the ground in an old bed sheet. So, that's my desire, to leave as little remains as possible. The best case scenario, I'm out hiking somewhere and turkey vultures eat my remains, and therefore I've served some useful purpose right up until after my own end. Is 2026 the final date for humanity? I suspect that habitat will be lost before then, and there might be a few people living in bunkers well stocked with food and water. But even after a year or two of that kind of existence, surrounded, immersed in ionizing radiation, restricted to life in the bunkers with like-minded sociopaths, I can't imagine there will be people much longer after that. So who would want to survive under those kinds of conditions? Certainly not me. So I suspect that shortly after we lose habitat for our species, which from a natural science perspective, not from a social science perspective, but from a natural sciences perspective, comes shortly after we experience the first ice-free Arctic in our history as a species. That was incorrectly projected to occur in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. Here we are, 2021, it hasn't happened yet, so I'd say we've dodged a few bullets along the way. The absence of ice in the Arctic means very rapid heating of the planet, almost certainly beyond our ability, or even very many other species, to adapt to that kind of environmental change in time to survive. Will there be a few people, quote, surviving in bunkers? Maybe, to the extent we could call that living. When does the first ice-free Arctic come? I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. I have on my list of things to do to contact Wisław Masłowski, who is the senior author of the paper that made the incorrect projection. Pauline and I visited with Dr. Masłowski when we were in Monterey a couple of years ago and had a conversation that you can find at Nature Bats Last about that projection. So he was the senior author, and it turned out to be incorrect, and we talked about why. It was a linear projection, and the last data point they had access to was the year 2007, which at the time was the lowest ice level observed, ice extent observed in the Arctic. So what they did in this linear projection, here's 2007, here's a relatively few points they had to work with, and that 2007 number dragged the line down a little bit more than it otherwise would have been, and made the projection hit 2016 plus or minus 3 years. So with a little more data, without that 2007 being an anomaly at the time, the projection might have indicated 2019 plus or minus 3 years. We don't really know. On my list of things to do is contact Dr. Masłowski and ask him what he thinks now, because at the time of our interview, he said they'd come up with a very good way to predict whether a certain year would be the year with an ice-free Arctic. But the prediction is for only 6 months out. Well, in a little over a week, we will be 6 months from the typical date of low ice extent, coinciding with the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere. The spring equinox is 6 months ahead of the autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere. The autumnal equinox is when we would expect the lowest ice extent in the Arctic. So I will send him an email message. Now, bear in mind that last time I sent him an email message, he didn't respond at all. He's a busy guy, and so I might not get an answer. If I do, and if I have his permission, then I will post that information at Nature Bats Last. We'll see. And no, Jimmy John, I did not. Yes, obviously I had the chance to check out the prion connection to COVID, but I didn't because I forgot about it. Because I get more than 200 email messages every day, and every single one of them asks me to do something. So I've been otherwise occupied. I'm tentatively scheduled more on the topic of cremation and burial is coming up here in the chat. And my dad was cremated shortly after his death on July 21st of 2020. And Pauline and I are tentatively scheduled to go to northern Idaho in early September of this year and scatter the ashes or bury the ashes at one of the high mountain lakes he loved to hike to and to fish in. So that's our current plan at that point. Yeah, I think so, David. I imagine that in the end times will mean very few people will be burying anybody. Yeah, that's right. Great epitaph, Raza Eco Warrior. We passed the 1.5 baseline. I don't think most people would understand that, even if there were many survivors. Pat the Batman fan says, I'm just praying everything collapses before Bezos and Musk find their way into space or to extend their miserable lifespans. I wrote about this in my latest contribution for Weekly Hubris, which was posted at weeklyhubris.com on March 1st and appeared on the blog, guymcpherson.com, I think on that day as well. So if you want to go look back through that, it actually specifically deals with colonizing space. Oh, Jimmy John, that's very interesting. The NOAA data indicating we're transitioning into an El Nino. I had not seen that. Perhaps you can send me that link when you send me your question about prions. And if I remember, I'll bring it up next time on the live stream. And at the very least, then I'll have another email message to read. So that's a good thing. Raza Eco Warrior is clearly working on his stand-up routine. Epitaph, nuclear families go fishing together. Go fishing together. There you go. Have you noticed how nervous Guy Fawkes is? He's blinking the whole time. That's got to indicate something. You don't see me blinking like that. Anybody else? Anybody else? Ask an ecologist anything, really, anything at all. Pat the Batman fan writes, David, I just don't want the worst of us to spread out any further into the galaxy. That was the point of my latest Weekly Hubris article. Is the sound screwed up for anyone else? I don't know. Is the sound screwed up for anyone else? Yeah, I said any question at all. So, Raza Eco Warrior asks, how come you treat your masked puppet as sentient? I didn't know people were taking me that seriously. The whole thing is like everything else in my universe. It's a cosmic joke. The puppet is too. I did see the massive dip in Arctic ice extent a few weeks ago in the NSIDC data, this National Snow and Ice Data Center, and I'm pretty sure it was an error. There was a significant downturn, but not as significant as reported. So there was some sort of error with the satellite making the observations or with the data being crunched once they arrived. I'm pretty sure that has been corrected, and it hasn't been corrected a lot. It went from free fall like this to free fall like this. So there was still a significant decline in the span of a few days of ice extent in the Arctic. Thank you very much, Trish Kaiser, for your extremely generous donation. What? My beautiful sidekick only gets a pint? Thank you, David Jenkins, for clarifying. 60% chance of El Nino via paper above, so I assume that's to start this September. So that's significant, and the next El Nino event, like all of them so far in human history, will release heat and carbon dioxide from the ocean and therefore accelerate climate change. The last 20 years or so, when we have records, indicate that the warmest years in that record occurred in the wake of El Nino Southern Oscillation events. Amy writes, you talk about the nuclear plants melting down. Do you see the planet burning up in the end? Not burning up per se. There's some data that we can extrapolate from, I think, from the peer-reviewed literature. And by extrapolation, we can foresee the loss of all plant life, and we can foresee the atmosphere being stripped away with particularly high levels of ionizing radiation. If that occurs, as has occurred with other exoplanets, then that would tell us that it would be a very cold place, that this would be more like Mars than like Venus. I mean, it might be like Venus for a while. So in neither case do I envision the planet burning up in the end. And we won't be here for that end, whenever it is. Oh yes, thank you for the reminder, Pauline. We will be taking a break from these live streams and from the twice weekly videos, Monday and Friday at Stock Market Open and Close. We're taking a break from all of that stuff because we will be moving to Vermont. Let's see, we've already filled 2 of the U boxes from U-Haul. This is not an advertisement. In fact, I hate U-Haul because of the very existence of U-boxes. So we've begun the packing. We are scheduled to move from here in less than 2 weeks. We will be driving hurriedly and having those U-boxes taken to as near to us as they will deliver them. And then we'll be living in Poultney, Vermont for the next 3 to 9 months. And if I had to guess, maybe I'm pessimistic. If I had to guess, it'll be closer to the 9 months than to the 3 to get the house built and placed onto the appropriate spot on the property. But we have been in contact with a general contractor and people who build houses and banks that provide mortgages for that sort of thing and blah, blah, blah. So that's all good. Certainly would be interesting to see what Earth looked like about 10 years after the latest mass extinction. It's at least the 8th mass extinction event in the last 2 billion years. And we're more than 10 years into this one and proceeding in order of magnitude faster than the fastest of the previous ones. So 10 years after would be fascinating to look at, but I don't think we're going to have that opportunity. It was Gerardo Ceballos who, upon release of the 2015 paper, indicating for the first time in the peer-reviewed literature that we were in the midst of a mass extinction event. And he said in an interview coincident with that paper being released in 2015 that our species would be among the first to disappear. So I'm surprised on multiple fronts we're still here with Habitat for Humans on Earth. Yes, we could shift to a permanent El Nino, consistent with what James Hansen has said in the past, and that would be quite inconvenient. We're on the path to a Pliocene-style future as early as 2030, and I suspect that would be very El Nino-like, and I don't think there's any stopping there. John Allen, talking about Fukushima. What would you like me to say? I strongly suspect, this is beyond my area of expertise. I have interacted with some nuclear experts. That does not make me a nuclear expert by any stretch of the imagination. And I suspect, but I don't know, that Fukushima is an extinction level event itself for our favorite species, Homo sapiens. And the evidence comes in the form of massive die-off of life in the Pacific Ocean, the inordinate rise in fetal disasters upon birth on the west coast of the United States a few months after the meltdowns at Fukushima. So I think there's enough to indicate that over the long term that we don't have Fukushima and the meltdown of other nuclear power plants is and are extinction level events, respectively. But I strongly suspect abrupt climate change will take care of our business before we need to worry about having the atmosphere stripped away by nuclear power plants melting down, or by having us all die as a result of lethal mutations emanating from from ionizing radiation in the atmosphere. Jimmy John asks, why do you think global methane concentrations have risen too fast in the past year compared to the historical trend? I'm not sure that that's true. I haven't seen any evidence of that. I think within the last year there's been 2 to 3 parts per billion. Let me back up. I think that we started going exponential in 2007. That methane in the atmosphere was exponential for quite a few years, all the time that monitoring was being done. And then for some reason that I don't understand, and I'm not sure any other scientist understands either, the atmospheric methane plateaued in about 2000 and stayed there until 2007. 2007, it started to go exponential again, rapidly increasing. I don't know why that's the case. So I think it's been going on for a while. I don't think it's just the last year, but I could be mistaken because I haven't seen the latest data, the latest information. Scott Andrews says, get a 30-year mortgage, you probably won't need to pay it back. I'm pretty sure about that. Yeah, I think it was during the 90s that banks were giving these 50-year interest-only mortgages. If we had the ability, that's what I'd be pushing for today. But oddly enough, no banks are doing that anymore. Thank you, Andy Lagsteins. Sorry for the undoubtedly incorrect pronunciation. Thank you for your generous donation. How many acres in Vermont are... Well, there's a lot of acres in Vermont altogether, just to be clear. But the property that we recently purchased is 1.04 acres. And it is... The regulations in Vermont allow building a home based on the septic system. We have an approved septic system that allows up to 2 bedrooms. It's interesting that the size of the house being constrained by the septic system has nothing to do with the number of bathrooms. Isn't that what feeds into the septic system? The sinks and the toilets? But it's limited by the number of bedrooms, so we can have a 2-bedroom house. And that's what we are having built on the 1.04 acres. Sky burial would be awesome. Pavlina, will you please make a note to go to Climate Reanalyzer and check out SST anomalies to check on how quickly the oceans are heating up? It is Pi Day, isn't it? I forgot. Since I'm not on campus anymore, people don't talk about Pi Day all the time, 314. If we were to transition to El Nino this year, how would this affect your NTHE prediction? I think it's about the same. You know, I've long thought that there would be a trigger, just like the rapid declines in stock market value, the bursting of the bubbles on Wall Street, have some sort of trigger. They don't just suddenly begin slowly declining. They don't just suddenly experience a rapid decline either, unless there's some sort of trigger. So there has to be some sort of banking thing or blah, 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 whatever. There has to be something that goes on. So if we were to transition to an El Nino, first of all, I'm not sure that an El Nino would be sufficient to cause loss of habitat around the world. I'm certain that it would exacerbate the ongoing loss of habitat that is already being experienced, especially in tropical and subtropical areas, as a result of lethal wet bulb temperatures being surpassed, as reported in peer-reviewed literature. However, I don't know that it would have profound impacts in places like New Zealand and Tasmania and Alaska and so on. So it could be the trigger, or maybe not. It could be the trigger that causes loss of aerosol masking due to reduced industrial activity, and therefore triggers our near-term extinction. How serious is the current U.S. administration on ecological matters on a scale of 1 to 10, in your opinion? We only have 1 to 10? There's no negative numbers here? You know, Joe Biden was the vice president during the Obama administration, and the Obama administration was notorious for its promises unfulfilled, and particularly on environmental issues. So I think we'll see little or nothing of significance happen. I also think, I can't imagine that we could avoid an ice-free Arctic during the first term of the Biden administration. All bets are off after that. That means in the very near term loss of habitat for humans. It doesn't matter how many acres we set aside as wilderness. I mean, that always matters in terms of taking right action and not being attached to the outcome. But with respect to our continued persistence on Earth, I think there is essentially nothing that can be done. The efforts that are being exhibited so far by the Biden administration are minor to the point of being insignificant while attempting to reach out to environmental organizations. But, meh. Thank you, Wang Chuk Nya Wang. And my apologies for the terrible pronunciation. Thank you for your generous gift. It's interesting, Jimmy John, Natalia Shkova has not ever put a date on when the methane bomb would go off. It was in late 2008 that she and her colleagues indicated it was highly possible for abrupt release at any time. That was a long time ago. That was at the European Geophysical Union meetings, I believe in November, at least late in 2008. So that's 12 and a half years ago. Abrupt release at any time for 12 and a half years. What tipping point is the most important in the Arctic latent heat? I think probably albedo, because the albedo flip is so sudden. So we go from essentially ice, white snow and ice. We go from that to, in a very short period of time, once we lose all the ice, we go to very dark ocean. So the impact of albedo is tremendous. However, latent heat is a big deal as well, whereas all that latent heat, currently there's an enormous amount of heat going into melting ice. I'm sure I pointed this out before. You take a gram of ice, the amount of energy necessary to convert that, sorry, not gram, cubic centimeter, or milliliter of ice converted to a milliliter of water, that takes nearly 80, Suddenly my brain has escaped and I have no memory of metric units. In any event, apply the same 80 calories, that doesn't sound quite right, anyway, to the liquid water, and it warms it up to 79.2 degrees, 90 degrees Celsius. So it goes from 0 degree ice to 0 degree water, and it takes an enormous amount of energy. Once all of that energy is poured into heating the water will heat very rapidly. So that's the power of latent heat. And it, like albedo, is very, very important. So Bell Creek refers to the AMOC, the North Atlantic Current. There's a paper in Science that just came out within the last week, maybe week and a half, senior authored by Michael Mann with a host of co-authors, indicating that the North Atlantic Current, the Gulf Stream, and its reversal had previously been attributed to some sort of internal mechanism, and this is really poor science and really poor science language that scientists have been using for a long time. They indicated that there's some sort of internal force, and basically it was, they couldn't explain why occasionally the AMOC reversed course. It just did, and so they attributed it to the inner workings of the planet, which is another way of saying we don't know a thing about it. And it turns out that global dimming from volcanism, is the current leading hypothesis for why the reversal has occurred. So, it could be that the Greenland ice sheet would slow or contribute to the reversal of that Gulf Stream, and the immediate effects would be a very cold northern Europe, and even northern North America would be quite cold. I seriously doubt that would be enough to reverse the ongoing heating of the planet. I don't think it'll even be close to that. Thank you, Raza Eco Warrior, for your generous gift. Please don't spend on drugs. Goes for Pauline too. Okay, alcohol is okay. Jimmy John asks, what is my favorite animal? Let's see. My first favorite animal is Pauline, a human animal. If we're talking about a species or in general, what sort of animal is my favorite? Well, was it W.C. Fields who said, outside a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside a dog, it's too dark to read. So I've had a few dogs in my life that were my best friend for a long time. So I have a proclivity for liking dogs as well. Thank you, Raza Eco Warrior, for your generous donation. Sorry I got hung up in what we're not allowed to spend it on and what we are. But what I meant to say was thank you. And no drugs needed. calories per gram, or grams per calorie. You're right. It's 79.2 calories per gram, David Jenkins. So thank you for correcting me on that. It's 79.2, not 79.7, but close enough. And it's calories in grams. I couldn't remember the metrics, and it's calories per gram, grams per calorie. To my knowledge, the magnitude of bacteria accelerating methane release when the permafrost melts, that has not been calculated, and I don't even know how it would be calculated. I'm sure somebody can come up with something based on laboratory experiments, but I haven't seen that, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But maybe. We'll see. Jimmy John, you are, like so many people these days, you are better informed about methane than I am. What do you think is causing the year-round methane release around Kamsolometz Island? This is the first time I've heard of Kamsolometz Island. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. So I don't know what is causing the year-round methane release. Please put that in your email message to me, which is growing exponentially in and of itself. Groucho Marx, thank your Brooklyn Culture Jam for pointing out the error of my ways. Inside of a dog, a book is too hard to read. That's from Groucho Marx. See, I don't even have time to look these things up. Usually when I'm doing a radio interview or an audio interview of some kind, I have my laptop sitting right here, and I got the phone, I'm answering the questions on the phone, and somebody will ask me a question about something I never heard of. I can look it up real quick while delaying for a response. But now you would see me if I was checking things on the Google. Jimmy John, I assume you're talking to me when you say, do you believe in karma, reincarnation, and nirvana? I do not believe in karma, I do not believe in reincarnation, and I believe nirvana is now, as Edward Abbey said more than once, and he even wrote it. Nirvana is now. Okay, there's these things going on in the chat now. I don't even have the slightest idea what people are chatting on about. I'm a huge Tasha Tudor fan. I don't even know who Tasha Tudor is. Is that a house? A two-door house? Which for me means a house with two doors on it. I don't know. You don't need to apologize for correcting me, Brooklyn Culture Jam. I appreciate it. It happened in my classes, and I thank the student for it every time. Have scientists ever told me off camera they believe my NTHE prediction? If so, who? No. No, I don't think you understand how few scientists actually will speak to me anymore, much less admit that I might actually be right about something. The common approach is to come out against me in public and never interact with me in private. I suspect that will continue until we're done. Oh, that's interesting from Science Daily from Mr. Peter. It has long been believed and hoped that there was a microbe that ate both iron and methane. And methane eating microbes have been known for a long time, actually. And Mr. Peter goes on, now German and Dutch researchers have actually found it. So it says at ScienceDaily.com. And Science Daily tends to quote and refer to the scientific literature posted at Science Advances or Science, which are two of the leading journals in the natural sciences. So that's interesting. And interesting that they're reporting that it has just been found, this microbe. I was writing about methane eating microbes in my long essay, Climate Change Summary, a long, long time ago. Would I consider myself a friend of Paul Beckwith? My friends don't defame me, so no. Yes, Bill Nye did say something off camera to me. Bill Nye is not a scientist, though. He's a science educator. When he first arrived at the home state of New Mexico, he, in front of everybody, came up and said to me, upon meeting me, that I certainly can't be right. And then we walked around for the next 4 or 5 hours and shot a bunch of video and had some significant conversations. He asked lots of questions, and I was able to answer a few of them. And even though the Jack Daniels was fake, still after that he pulled me off to the side and he said, 2030? Don't you think that's pretty conservative? So he had a change of mind after listening for a bit. Thank you very much, Brooklyn Culture Jam, for your exceptional generosity. David Lutz writes, Guy, I think you should start a comedy routine like Stephen Wright style with morbid humor. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 years. Had you not even noticed? Apparently I'm not doing it right. And thank you. Love the Stephen Wright quote. You can't have everything. Where would you put it? All right. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Thank you for your recent membership addition. And I think it's time to wrap up here. We've been going just over an hour, and I'm completely and thoroughly exhausted because that's what happens when I'm in public in any form. Oh, interesting question. Will our demise begin in a summer or winter period? I'd say definitely yes, for sure. Absolutely. The demise of people in the tropical and subtropical regions is already happening because of lethal wet bulb temperatures. It's happening obviously during the warmer time of the year there in the tropic and subtropical regions. And beyond that, we just don't know. I strongly suspect that if there's a stock market crash, for example, it'll be coincident with the significant reduction in the harvest of grain crops. Now, that could be relatively early in the year if their grain crops are winter wheat. And it could be, and this is typically when the stock market corrections happen, is late in the year, like around September, October, because they coincide with the harvest of corn and to a lesser extent soybeans. So that those tidbits point towards, if it's a stock market crash that is going to trigger a large-scale die-off of Homo sapiens, then history would suggest that it will occur in late fall, early winter in the northern hemisphere. and that disruptions in supply chains will get even worse than they are now, and so people will go a little bonkers. Okay. I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thank you for the members. Thank you, Back to Earth 63, for your contribution just now. Zoom obituaries soon is a question. Yes, we started with the Zoom obituaries and epitaphs. So when this is posted, the permalink is posted on YouTube, which will occur within the next couple of hours. I will also post it at guymcpherson.com within the next couple of hours, whenever it shows up on YouTube. Then you'll be able to see what happened in the beginning. And thank you for your generous contribution. Thank you, everybody.